Now, we talk about them all the time, but what really makes a good trade target? Is it your team situation, the value you can get a player for, or just someone you're looking to build around for the future? Obviously, whether you're rebuilding or contending, that can play a role. But what else goes into identifying the perfect trade target for you? Today, Mike and our friend Marvin are out to answer that very question. Before we get to it, I do hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like if you do. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. What goes into your thought process when you're trying to nail down some trade targets? But hey, with all that said, let's get right to the content you came for.
How do you actively pursue and do trades during the season? So let's start it off. Let's start it off with the rebuilding team. When you are rebuilding, what are you looking for in your trade targets and how are we acquiring them? Marvin, we're going to start with you since you are our esteemed guest. Floor is yours.
Generally, what I try to do with some of my rebuilding teams, and I have a couple right now myself in Dynasty, I try to look at my roster and really assess it and figure out, when is my realistic contending window? Is it, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Then based on that, I try to find players who I think will not plateau in value, but increase over that time span and potentially put me in contention. So generally at this time of the year, it's young guys, right? Drafted probably this year or even last year, guys who were drafted within, the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. That usually means they'll get opportunity at some point here. And they were productive in college. Those are kind of the 3 things I try to check off. And if they check those boxes, those are the players that I try to invest in. And I try my best, and I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, I try to avoid trading away picks if I can as a rebuilding team, just because those will only grow in value in time, and instead flip some of the older guys for those younger players.
You want to stay away from trading picks because you want those picks too. You want those
for sure.
Those players, you want the younger assets. For myself, what I'm looking for are younger players with a high ceiling. Guys that might not, maybe they're going to be a free agent next year. They haven't popped yet. Maybe they're looking to get a change of scenery. For example, recording this today, Kadarius Toney just got traded to the Kansas City Chiefs. So he's a guy that if I'm rebuilding, I'm looking to acquire a Kadarius Toney. I will typically attempt to move better players, better aging players, and acquire a younger, high ceiling player with additional draft capital. Like Marvin mentioned before, I don't want to give away my draft capital. I want to acquire it. Let me give you an example. I have 2 teams right now. One's middle of the road, one's bad. That has Breece Hall on it. And people are trying to get Breece Hall off me. And I get it. They're trying to buy the value dip. He just got hurt. Mm-hmm. So the trade I'm attempting to make is I'm trying to get their Brian Robinson and a 2023 first for Breece Hall. 2 people, no bites on it so far. They've rejected it. Maybe we could revisit that in the offseason. My thought process there is Brian Robinson a step down from Breece Hall? Yes.
Yep.
He is healthy. I'll take the first round pick. Hopefully leverage that to get a Jahmyr Gibbs or a Bijan Robinson. That is my goal right there. When you're contending, what are you looking for in your trade targets and how are you acquiring them? Marvin, we're going to start with you again.
Yeah. So in this case, I am primarily looking at older guys here, which sounds crazy, but when you're in your championship window, you don't know how long that's going to be, right? Could be a year, could be longer than that. And if you're lucky enough, you could be contending for a while. But, these older guys are generally there for a discount. You think about, Jamar Chase just got hurt. He was one of the examples I thought of here. Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, those guys are players that can help you win now and for the future, but those guys are pricey, right? So you think about players like Joe Mixon or Adam Thielen or even Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is someone who people are probably trying to trade away. But he's going to smash this year, considering they don't have a single decent receiving option. They're going to have to run the ball and rely on him going forward. Those are guys that will be good this year. And really, that's the window you're looking for. You're not trying to look too far ahead. And it's, at some point in fantasy football, we're just trying to win. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. It shouldn't be to rebuild year after year after year. If you get into that contending window, take advantage of it. And sometimes those older players, they can help you now.
Question for you then. You're talking about, just for an example, you're talking about the Titans. They don't have any reliable pass catchers. Robert Woods coming off that injury, starting to find his stride a little bit.
Yeah.
And with Treylon Burks being out for a while, do you think Robert Woods could be a guy that you could target, especially when you consider that I think you can get him cheaper now than his price has been in quite a long time?
Yeah, he's been so reliable in years past, and obviously it's just the injury that's kind of held him back. But yeah, you look at what he's done with Treylon Burks and he's been out for a while. 9 targets in week 3, 8 targets in week 5. Not too productive here this past week, but they'll need someone to throw to, and we know he's good. And the further out he gets from that injury and from that, I think it was an ACL tear that he had, the better he'll get. So he's someone that I'm definitely trying to acquire. And he, like you said, he won't cost much.
Sean's chiming in here. He moved a 2023 first, a 2024 first, and Josh Palmer for Saquon Barkley for contender push. So there you go.
Yeah.
Those are big boy moves right there. And you know what? This is going to kind of tie into what I want to talk about too. So Sean, perfect timing right here. So for me, I know that win now is typically put with aging players like Marvin said, and that's not necessarily wrong, but there's another way to look at it too. I want some young vets who still have time. Let me give you some example. AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, guys like that. I want to win now and later. And if I'm paying premium draft capital, I don't want it to be for a 1-year fluke. Again, premium draft capital here. Like Marvin and I talked about, Robert Woods, not premium draft capital.
Yep.
But the type of move that Sean made, you're giving up that draft capital. Now, the 2023 first stings a little bit. It's going to be hard to get back. You have a whole year to get the 2024 first back. And Josh Palmer, he's a nice piece, but Saquon Barkley is going to be on Sean's team for a while. Oh, Sean says it was a 2024 second. Okay, that's still premium draft capital in my opinion. But Saquon Barkley is going to be on his team for a while. He's not a 1-year fluke. So that's kind of what I look at.
One thing I also want to mention real quick is that, with some of these trades where you're giving up premium draft capital, like Sean giving up 2023 first, you might be giving up now, but there's always an opportunity to trade back into that later, right? So just because you trade it away now just doesn't mean you're out of that. There's always opportunities where you can always make moves, and it helps you win now. And maybe you can find a way to get back in there later. Maybe trade Saquon high when he's at his peak and hopefully doesn't get injured by the end of the year. There's always that, right? So there's a lot of flexibility, and that's why Dynasty is so fun.
So it's easy to peg a player as a trade target after they break out. What are the signs that it might be time to buy in on a player during the season before they break out? But Marvin, what are your thoughts on this?
There are some metrics that I try to look at that give you an idea if someone's on the verge of breaking out. And Kadarius Toney, you mentioned him. He's a great example because he flashed in some of these metrics last year too. So you think about, anything related to snaps and routes and efficiency to that. So yards per route run, yards per snap, target share, air yard share. If a player is accounting for a lot of majority of the team's targets or air yards, but they're averaging like 50% of the snaps, they're not starter level snaps. That shows you that they're being used when they're not really getting all the opportunity on the field. So, Alec Pierce, for example, was one of the guys a few weeks ago, had like a 47% air yard share on like a ridiculously low snap share. So he was being targeted downfield, and eventually he had some of those double-digit PPR games, right? Same with Wandale just a few weeks ago, led the Giants in target share, but was last in snap share, if I remember right. So those are examples where guys are getting the opportunity, but they're not quite healthy yet, or they're not quite on the field as much as we'd like. And then when those opportunities come, those snaps come, targets should go up as well. And we've seen that. And some of those guys, if you bought in early, they're producing right now. Like Wandale, for example, is one of those.
It's funny too, because nobody wants to touch Michael Pittman or Alec Pierce because of
not right now. Yeah.
I'm buying, man.
Yeah.
Long-term
exactly.
outlook, I'm fine with it. I know the Colts they have to figure it out, right? So for me, like Marvin said, I look at snap share, I look at targets. One thing that I like to do too, and this might sound foolish, but I've gotten some really good insights. I go on Twitter and I ask fans of the team, that I know. They have insights that a guy like me, Marvin knows the Packers. He's going to know things about Green Bay that I'm not going to know because I listen to Eagles podcasts. I don't listen to Packers podcasts. I don't follow Packers beat writers or anything like that. So he would know if there's anyone that I know and I'm friendly with that are affiliated with team in any way. Talk to people, network, get to know people, look at some snap shares, stuff like that. Obviously, buying low is always ideal. How do I identify these situations? But what really makes it a true buy low option and not an asset you're buying low on just to have depreciate even more on your roster?
When I'm looking at some of these players, it's, we talked about showing flashes of production and looking at some of these metrics like target share, air yard share. Expected fantasy points is another interesting one because it translates some of those, targets and air yards and all that into what they should be producing, not necessarily what they are producing. And so that tells you, hey, an average player would produce this much, but they're not because of whatever reason. They're not getting catchable targets. They're in a bad offense. And some of the guys that you think about, like Garrett Wilson, for example, right now his value is dipped, right? But he's still averaging, if I remember right, he's still averaging around a 20% target share. It hasn't changed with Zach Wilson. It's still around that 20% range, which is really good for a rookie. Drake London's another guy. He's around that elite target share range. They're just not passing the ball enough. He's still commanding the targets. They're just not a pass happy team. And that could change with the Jets, right? With that Brees Hall injury. They might throw the ball more. So those are things where Garrett Wilson is someone I'm trying to get right now, because someone might be thinking, okay, well, I can't contend with him. I thought I could, but I can't now. Now might be the time to trade for him. DJ Moore just broke out again. But when I wrote some of these examples, he was a guy who was around that 20% target share range. They just weren't passing the ball. He was getting the targets. And so try to find these guys that are not necessarily meeting what they should be from a fantasy standpoint, but the opportunities are always there. And so, like you said, look at those box scores, find guys that are getting the targets, but it's just not translating into production yet. But it more likely than not will eventually lead to more points.
For me, it's about a player, is going to be giving more opportunity either after a poor performance or an injury.
Yeah.
Guys like Javonte Williams, Marquise Brown, he got hurt. But the correct way to navigate that, I feel like it's not good timing to jump on it right away. I understand that that's when their value will likely be the lowest, but it's fresh in everyone's mind. Wait till these guys are at least able to be put on IR, on sleeper, and let it simmer for a little bit. You know what I mean? Once you see teams that are either starting to get in and out of contention, that's when you can make your move. That's when you know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So you can say, hey, I'm not in it. You are. Let me give you this piece. You give me Javonte, maybe some draft capital. You work it out. Mm-hmm. So timing is really everything. This is a good question. I feel like this is something that doesn't get talked about enough. Does it make sense to pay the premium for a player in a rebuild? We could say you're still paying a premium for Javonte Williams, Brees Hall, but does that make sense when you're rebuilding?
Yeah, I definitely think it does. And it obviously depends on the player you're targeting. If they check all the boxes that you look for from a prospect or potential superstar in the NFL, right? And you think about Jamar Chase last year, for example, before we really knew who he was. And I mean, we knew he was a good prospect, but there were some moments to start, when the first couple games, I'm sure there's like levels of doubt there, right? I mean, you don't know he's going to be this good the way we've seen him over the last couple of, over the last year and a half. But early on, if you paid up for him and his value is pretty high, then it's even higher now, it would have paid off, right? These are guys that first round wide receivers, first round running backs, you pay up for them, their value is only going to improve. And I talked a little earlier about the your contending window and trying to figure that out. Pay the premium if it makes sense for your contending window or your rebuilding window when that's going to end. Because if a Jonathan Taylor, for example, is going to cost you a lot right now. Now, obviously, it's hard to trade for him, but Jamar Chase, for example, he's injured right now. Trading for him, if you think you're going to contend next year after you cash in some of those 2023 picks, then Jamar Chase is going to be right there for you in your roster. And it's fine that you paid the premium because he's a really, really good player. Obviously, don't do that for older players, even though, like a Saquon, for example, I'm hesitant a little bit because he's kind of on that cusp. Mm-hmm. But for a contending team, that's good. But as a rebuilding team, I'm kind of staying away.
That makes sense. So what you're saying is you'll gladly pay for Brees Hall, Javonte.
Yeah, for sure.
Jameson Williams, guys like that.
Yeah.
You're not going to want to buy a CMC, a Saquon Barkley, or a Dalvin Cook. That doesn't make sense on your rebuilding team.
Right. Yeah. And even guys like right now, like Dameon Pierce is another interesting one because I like what we're seeing from him right now, but I'm hesitant because of the draft capital that they invested in him. And we've seen that you can always replace their running backs. Now he's really good and all that, but he's someone who I would hesitate to invest in because there's a higher chance that they could replace him versus a Brees Hall. They're not going to replace him. No way they're going to do that after they traded up to get him in the second round, right? So, those are some of the players that I think about. I think those are some of the hottest names that are kind of polar opposites and who I'd want to target right now.
Again, if you could afford the player and you could still have draft capital to reload your roster, I'm completely fine with it. As long as it's the right player, it's a young player. You want your roster. I mean, obviously your roster is going to get a little older every year because these guys are aging, but you don't want a massive age increase. All right. So last one. Hey, same question. Does it make sense to do that for a contending team? Will you pay it for premium win now assets, even if it's at the detriment of the future of your dynasty team?
Definitely depends on the player you're targeting here. We talked about some of those aging players earlier, like a Leonard Fournette or Joe Mixon. I understand why some teams would want to go in and pay the price of the 2023 first. And we talked about we can always trade back into that. I just hesitate because of, if for some reason like a Leonard Fournette gets injured here, he's going to help you win now, but anything can happen next year. Probably his value is going to be even lower when he's 28. You can't trade him away. And so those are the guys that, I hesitate to trade away those premium assets. Like you mentioned, if you can trade away like a 2-for-1 and a couple of pieces, like I can't think right now what exactly would work, but a 2-for-1 to get Leonard Fournette, that's not a premium asset. That's fine. Go all in that sense, but don't try to trade away like 2 first-round picks for, like a Dalvin Cook, who has a little bit of an injury history. He's 26 now, I believe. That's where I'd be a little hesitant. Jonathan Taylor, on the other hand, who's younger. You talked about guys that kind of have still that younger window that they can help you now, but still be there for you for the next 2 or 3 years. That's where I'm fine going all in on Jonathan Taylor, Justin Jefferson, some of those guys that still have like that, Justin Jefferson obviously has many years left, but Jonathan Taylor at least has, 2 to 3 years of elite production left, hopefully. So yeah. What do you think?
For me, I guess it really depends on how win now you are.
Yeah.
If you're a team that you think that you're a piece or two away, you really want to take that championship home, then go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because at some point you have to make that decision where now's the time to pounce.
Yeah.
If you're currently like the 6th or 7th seed and, every week it's a little shaky, like you're getting really lucky every week, I would not do that personally. That's just how I look at it. I'm all about making that jump, but it's got to be the right time to jump.
Well, that is it for today's video. I do hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. What things do you like to consider when you're thinking about your trade targets? And was this video helpful in identifying your next perfect trade target? Now, I'm sure you have some great trade targets in mind, but be sure to check out the 2 videos on your screen now before you go and dive into my top 20 strategies when I'm making trades to help you get a leg up on your league mates. But hey, that's going to be it for us today. We will see y'all in the next one, but until then, y'all have a good one.